Chapter 1: Recognizing the Illusion, Understanding the Nature of Suffering. It is said in many spiritual traditions that life, as most people experience it, is shaped by illusions of the mind. The greatest of these illusions is the notion that we are separate, individual selves cast adrift in a hostile or indifferent universe. We believe we must continuously strive, fight, and grasp in order to survive or to be happy. We see problems wherever we look: anxieties about the future, regrets about the past, restless dissatisfaction in the present moment. Stress accumulates in the body, fear clouds the mind, and our days turn into a continuous series of efforts to defend ourselves against an unrelenting tide of potential threats. In this chapter, we will travel deep into the territory of this illusion, examining how it rises, how it perpetuates suffering, and what happens when we begin to see it for what it really is. In the beginning, it may seem impossible to grasp the idea that we are deceiving ourselves about who we truly are. How could something as close to us as our own sense of identity be an illusion? Yet, this is precisely what the masters and sages across ages and cultures have pointed out. The individual ego, the separate sense of I that we defend and nurture, is a construct born of mental activity. We do not come into the world with a polished identity. Rather, we collect bits of interpretation and memory, gather them into a conceptual structure, and call that structure me. Then we spend our days protecting, bolstering, and enhancing this construct. Each time we feel slighted, threatened, or anxious, it is fundamentally that mental construct rather than our true essence that we are worried about. From early childhood, we learn to identify with certain attributes: our name, our body, our preferences, our talents, our families, our cultural values, and so on. There is nothing inherently problematic in identifying with certain traits. The problem emerges when we become so exclusively identified that we forget the deeper reality beneath these masks. Like an actor who slips into character so thoroughly that he loses the sense of where the script ends and his true being begins, we become entangled in the drama of the role. From that entanglement, suffering inevitably rises. As soon as we believe this role is who we truly are, any threat to the role is perceived as a threat to life itself. The foundation of anxiety, then, is the belief in a fragile self that can be harmed, undermined, or dissolved by external forces. The deeper we sink into this assumption, the more stress and fear build up within us. We worry about how we appear in the eyes of others because we assume that their judgments affect our innate worth. We fear failure because we believe that failure marks a fundamental flaw in our identity. We chase experiences we label as pleasant or positive because we think those experiences will validate our sense of self. Whenever the external world refuses to conform to our wishes, and it inevitably does, our carefully constructed sense of self feels under siege. When we take a step back and observe these processes, we begin to notice that a large portion of our suffering is generated from within the mind itself. Of course, there can be external difficulties, losses, illnesses, financial troubles, but the way we respond to those difficulties intensifies or diminishes our suffering. In fact, the very notion of problems often has to do with the way the mind frames experiences. A single event might be seen as catastrophic by one person and as a learning opportunity by another, while a third person might see it as neutral or unimportant. The event in itself has no fixed reality as a problem. Rather, it is the mind's interpretation that magnifies or mitigates its intensity. This should be understood not as an exercise in positive thinking or denial of reality, but as a direct recognition that the stories we habitually weave around our experiences become the lens through which we feel and live. Anxiety and stress flourish in the midst of these stories. If you look carefully, you will see how the mind loves to project itself into imagined futures, conjuring up endless what-if scenarios. It also dredges up the past, replaying hurts and regrets over and over again. In doing so, it produces a tangled web of thought forms, and we become so ensnared that we fail to see the clarity of the present moment. We keep trying to solve these mental constructs as though they were real, as though the next solution will free us from our dissatisfaction. But because these constructs emerge from a misunderstanding of who we are, no purely mental resolution will suffice. The mind tries to fix itself, tries to fix the world, tries to fix the past, tries to fix the future, and all this fixing becomes its own source of suffering. The irony is that we often pursue spiritual paths or self-improvement strategies for precisely the same reason. We enter a practice because we have labeled ourselves as flawed, anxious, or not there yet, and we want to fix these perceived flaws. We approach meditation like we might approach a workout routine, hoping to sculpt the perfect mind in the same way some people want to sculpt the perfect body. This is the paradox of seeking enlightenment. If we start from the premise that we are fundamentally broken, we will remain within the illusion no matter how diligently we apply ourselves. The more desperate we become to find enlightenment, the more we reinforce the idea that it is something separate from us, an external treasure we must acquire. But spiritual masters repeatedly tell us that enlightenment is not a distant goal. It is the very essence of our being, constantly present, hidden in plain sight only because we are too busy trying to improve or defend our imaginary self to notice what has always been here. We can compare this to a dream scenario. Imagine you are dreaming that you are a penniless wanderer searching for gold. You roam from place to place, convinced that if only you could locate some hidden treasure, your life would be filled with ease and joy. Meanwhile, you remain unaware that the dream figure who is searching is itself not real, and the goal, like everything else in the dream, remains a projection. If at any point you realize that it is all a dream, the chase dissolves in the light of that recognition. Yet, in the dream logic, the chase can seem very compelling. You might develop elaborate strategies for searching for gold. You might measure your self-worth by how many coins you have managed to gather in the dream. But the entire scenario is based upon the foundational belief that you lack something essential. Upon waking, you laugh at the entire pursuit, relieved to see it was never necessary. Such is the nature of spiritual awakening in relation to the illusions of the mind. Yet, how do we begin to see through these illusions in our waking life? How do we move from intellectual understanding, yes, I get that the ego is an illusion, to the visceral realization that frees us from stress and anxiety? This chapter lays the groundwork for that journey by examining the structure of suffering, the process by which identification with thought and emotion leads to the experience of fear, lack, and struggle. By understanding how suffering takes root, we become better equipped to see how to uproot it. And it all begins by honestly acknowledging that we are caught in a web of misunderstanding. One way to begin is to notice how vigorously the mind fights the present moment. In each moment, something is happening. The mind, however, rarely rests with what is happening. Instead, it decides whether it likes or dislikes it, whether it wants more of it or less of it, whether it can manipulate it, how it might exploit it, and so on. The mind is so busy evaluating, strategizing, fearing, and craving that it almost never simply abides in the experience itself. This produces a subtle sense of friction or dissatisfaction known in some traditions as dukkha, often translated as suffering or unease. We become so habituated to this friction that we treat it as normal. Our normal state, then, is one of persistent discontent, always wanting reality to be different than it is, always expecting the next moment to provide what this moment cannot. When it comes to anxiety, notice how it rises from thoughts about a threatening future, combined with an assumption that we are not equipped to handle at future. We begin to spin stories about everything that could go wrong, or how someone might judge us, or how we might fail to meet expectations. The body responds to these mental stories with increased heart rate, tension in the stomach, shallower breathing, signs of the fight or flight response. But the threat we are reacting to is not actually here. It is an image in the mind projected onto the blank screen of tomorrow. Because the mind does not differentiate clearly between an imagined threat and a real one, we find ourselves living in a near constant state of alert, vigilance, or low-level panic. In modern life, with so many stimuli demanding our attention, it can feel like there is no escape from the mind's anxious storytelling. Stress similarly rises when we feel that we must control or accomplish more than is realistically possible. We look at our to-do lists, our bank accounts, our relationships, and we imagine an endless set of tasks that must be completed for life to be in proper order. We push ourselves relentlessly, thinking that if we can only manage everything perfectly, we will finally rest at ease. But perfection never comes. There is always some new task, some new complication, some unforeseen obstacle. The mind is never satisfied, for satisfaction would mean the end of striving, and the mind's sense of self is built upon striving, achieving, and struggling. In this way, the illusion that we must fix or control life leads us into perpetual stress. At the root of all these tendencies, anxiety about the future, regret about the past, stress about the present, lies the assumption that the separate I is effortless. We think we must preserve this I, protect it, or enhance it. Everything is interpreted through this lens. If our ambitions are thwarted, we feel like a failure. If our social status is threatened, we feel shame or anger. If our beliefs are challenged, we feel the need to defend them. In each case, the mind imagines it is fighting for its survival. Yet what is it precisely that is under threat? Is it not a storyline, a collection of images and concepts we carry about ourselves? If you pause for a moment and try to locate this I, you might find it surprisingly elusive. You might say, well, I am this body. But if you focus on each part of the body in turn, hands, feet, head, organs, blood, none of them individually is me, nor does the sum of them altogether quite capture the subjective sense of I-ness. Then you might turn to thoughts. I am my mind, my thoughts, my memories. Yet memories come and go, shifting over time, and the thoughts appear and vanish moment by moment. Which of those thoughts is actually the real you? If you were your thoughts, you would vanish whenever your mind falls silent. Then you might turn to emotions. I am my feelings, my desires, my fears. But feelings too are transient, fluctuating day by day or even hour by hour. If the I were truly in emotion, you would cease to exist whenever that emotion subsided. As we inspect each layer of body-mind phenomena, we discover that none of them persist continuously. Each is an impermanent event rising in awareness. The more deeply we inspect, the more we see that the I we take ourselves to be is a shifting composite, an amalgam of perceptions, sensations, and conceptual labels. At a practical level, we still have to navigate daily life in a body, with a name, in a specific cultural context. Yet, the deeper recognition is that none of these elements define our ultimate being. We are something far more fundamental, the timeless, formless awareness in which all these experiences rise and pass away. The conflict rises because we confuse the ephemeral layers with the timeless awareness. We treat the ephemeral layers, our stories, identities, emotions, body states, as if they were our entire reality. Because these layers are constantly changing, the mind is in a perpetual scramble to maintain some sense of continuity or solidity. It's like trying to hold onto water with our bare hands. The tighter we squeeze, the faster it slips away. This is why fear, anxiety, and discontent persist. The mind tries to secure what cannot be secured. It attempts to freeze the fluid dance of life into a fixed shape that can be managed or controlled. This dynamic underscores the illusion of control. We believe that if we just try hard enough, we can direct reality to match our personal preferences, thereby dispelling all discomfort. Of course, we can exert influence on our lives, make wise decisions, and change certain circumstances. But we cannot fully control the unfolding of events. The rest of reality does not obey our individual will. When we operate under the delusion that it should, we are bound to suffer. We become frustrated with the unpredictable nature of life. We become resentful when other people's choices clash with our desires, and we become anxious whenever we sense that our fate of control might be crumbling.